Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we have a really unique mission ahead of us. We aren't just summarizing a story.
No, not at all.
We are performing a complex literary excavation. We're digging through decades of fragmented source material.
It's quite a collection.
It is. We've got the cold, hard reality of old Canadian newspaper clippings. Then there's the fantastical, sometimes lurid world of 1930s pulp fiction. And finally, the fiercely guarded, intensely subjective memories of one aging narrator, Iris Chase.
And it's a spectacular task because, our sources present a reality that was deliberately obscured. On one hand, you have the public record.
Right.
The concise, almost clinical facts about these tragic accidents printed in the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail.
And on the other hand...
On the other, you have the devastating private truth buried inside a stack of cheap school exercise books. And they're tied up not with a ribbon or anything, but with common kitchen string. That contrast right there is everything.
So our goal today is to meticulously distinguish between that public performance, the protective fiction, and then the final brutal reality. The truth surrounding the lives and ultimately the deaths of the Chase and Griffin families.
Exactly.
We are diving deep into the secrets held by Iris, our narrator and survivor, her brilliant but tragic sister Laura, the ruthlessly ambitious industrialist Richard Griffin, and the forbidden politically charged figure Alex Thomas.
And we have to follow Iris's timeline really carefully because she's an unreliable narrator, or maybe more accurately, a meticulously selective narrator.
She's controlling the narrative.
Completely. She's writing in her extreme old age, around 1999, if you look at those late newspaper dates. So she is controlling the flow of information, giving us a clear map through a very complex and fraught time period.
We're talking about the social upheaval of the 1930s depression right through to the sort of stifling post-war conformity of the 1940s.
Yeah, and it's a story about how powerful people leverage crises.
How?
And how the vulnerable, how they're forced to write their own truth into fantasy just to survive.
Okay, so let's start with the hard facts. Let's unpack this public record first, beginning with the two defining deaths that bracket this whole scandal and really establish the family's public narrative.
Good place to start.
The first and most central tragedy is the death of Laura Chase in 1945. It was presented to the world as a straightforward, if tragic, car accident.
The official account, and this is from the Toronto Star on May 26, 1945, is cold and precise. A coroner's inquest ruled it an accidental death.
Just an accident.
Just an accident. Laura Chase, age 25, drove her car off a St. Clair Avenue bridge, the Ravine Bridge specifically, where the car crashed and caught fire. She was killed instantly. The public was given closure almost immediately.
And the official explanation, which we know come directly from Iris, at that time she was Mrs. Richard E. Griffin, it was very specific about the contributing causes, right? It framed it entirely in terms of systemic failures and her personal ailments.
That's exactly right. Iris cited that Laura suffered from severe headaches affecting her vision.
Oh, wow.
So right away, that offers a simple medical explanation for why she might have lost control of the vehicle. And crucially, they explicitly denied any possibility of intoxication.
Of course.
They noted that Laura did not drink. This just maintained the image of the respectable, if fragile young woman, countered any potential rumors right out of the gate.
And the official inquiry even tried to shift the blame away from the family entirely, didn't it?
It did. The inquiry focused on the city's infrastructure. They suggested a contributing factor was that a tire had caught in an exposed streetcar track near the bridge.
So it's the city's fault.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Questions were briefly raised about the adequacy of safety precautions by the city engineer, but they were quickly dismissed. So the narrative became a young woman with poor eyesight, an unfortunate collision with systemic urban neglect. It was a perfectly sanitized tragedy.
One that conveniently excused any suggestion of suicide or emotional distress or,
heaven forbid, foul play.
But the narrator, Iris, she immediately puts this public composure right up against her own private, really chilling reaction to the news.
It's a fascinating study in wartime and social pragmatism. She recalls the exact moment the news came. Her reaction wasn't immediate debilitating grief, it was calculation.
Pure calculation.
She knew she had to go to the morgue, but first, she needed the tools of social performance. Gloves and a hat with a veil.
A veil.
She needed to cover her eyes, not out of modesty, but because there might be reporters. She immediately called Richard at his office and warned him he needed to prepare a statement of grief. This is the cold, calculated pragmatism of a survivor.
And yet, right in the middle of this cold pragmatism comes this stunning, life-altering discovery.
Yes, the truth is found in the place where she hid her most practical belongings, her dressing room drawer, where she kept her stockings. And there it was.
A manuscript.
The hidden stack of cheap school exercise books tied with that mundane kitchen string. And the moment she finds it, her composure just breaks. She notes her teeth were chattering and she was cold all over, a physical response to shock that completely contradicts her earlier, calculated composure.
So she is immediately confronted with the reality that Laura wanted her to find. The hidden explanation, even before the official mourning period could properly begin.
Absolutely. The manuscript's existence means that Laura, in her final moments, that suspended breath before the plummet, was actively calculating what Iris would do.
Wow.
Iris later speculates on the whirlwind of thoughts that must have occupied Laura. Of Alex, of Richard, of bad faith, of our father and his wreckage, of God perhaps and her fatal triangular bargain.
And the gloves. The gloves Iris planned to wear feel so much more significant now.
They do. To wash her hands of any potential reporters. In retrospect, it feels like a Pontius Pilate gesture, attempting to wash her hands of the whole situation. But the book, the manuscript, makes that impossible.
Okay, now let's move forward 2 years to 1947 and the second death. Richard E. Griffin. If Laura's death was framed as tragic, Richard's was framed as respectable, but it just confirms the darkness at the heart of this family.
Richard, at 47, was a prominent industrialist and, critically, a potential progressive conservative candidate for high office.
A big deal.
A very big deal. The Globe and Mail, reporting on June 4th, 1947, stated he was discovered in his sailboat, the Water Nixie, tied up at his private jetty at the family's summer residence, Avilion, in Port Ticonderoga.
And the official cause of death?
Cerebral hemorrhage. Again, a neat, medically defined natural cause. And you hear that crucial phrase that echoes the report about Laura's death. No foul play is suspected.
So a quiet, natural end for a powerful man who seemed destined for the political spotlight.
That was the public story.
But Richard's public image was entirely constructed around his ambition, wasn't it? I mean, he wasn't just self-made, he was self-constructed, propped up by his family connections.
Oh, he was a machine of ambition. He and his formidable sister, Winifred Griffin Pryor, worked relentlessly in tandem to advance his political agenda. Winifred was the social architect.
The one behind the scenes.
Completely, arranging every dinner party, every luncheon at places like the Arcadian Court, and planning these massive social functions like the infamous Xanadu Ball. These events were all designed to keep Richard visible, relevant, and moving towards candidacy for the St. David's riding. He was perpetually presented in the society pages as favored for the candidacy. His whole life was a performance for the press.
And the terrifying extent of this control becomes visible when Iris recounts their honeymoon in July of 1936, a moment that should have been pure marital bliss.
This is what we call the honeymoon deception. It's just staggering. They were crossing the Atlantic, first on the Berengaria, and then returning on the luxurious maiden voyage of the Queen Mary. During this time, Iris's father, Captain Chase, died. A terrible death, locking himself in his turret. And Richard intercepted and collected 5 telegrams detailing her father's death, sent by the housekeeper Rennie.
5 of them?
5. And he concealed them from Iris for the entire duration of the trip.
That's not a mistake. That's a calculated strategy. What was his motive for this stunning act of, emotional cruelty?
It wasn't simple thoughtlessness. It was total clinical control. He needed Iris to remain focused on the life he was building for them, undistracted by grief, which he viewed as messy and unproductive.
So the funeral, the mourning, the financial chaos.
He wanted all of that postponed until she was firmly back on Canadian soil as Mrs. Richard E. Griffin. He was ensuring that her entire emotional landscape was dictated by his needs and his schedule.
How did she find out?
She only found out later when Laura, who was hysterical, tracked her down by telephone crying, "He's dead, he's dead, we sent 5 telegrams." It just reveals Richard's foundational belief that he had the right to filter reality for the women in his life.
So Richard wasn't just leveraging emotional control. He built his industrial and social status by leveraging the desperate economic times of the Depression, specifically targeting the vulnerable Chase family business.
That's the core of his origin story. Richard owned Royal Classic Knitwear, a company perfectly positioned to profit during and after the Depression. He saw Captain Chase's struggling business, the Chase & Sons button factory, not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity.
An opportunity to be exploited.
Exactly. Yeah. Captain Chase, the girl's father, was an honorable man, but fundamentally broken by the war. He felt this intense, almost religious obligation to his workers.
Right, he felt like a captain who should go down with the ship. He refused to sell or lay off men despite the crushing reduced demand.
And that idealistic, almost sentimental refusal to cut his losses made him financially vulnerable. Richard knew exactly how to exploit that. We see reports of Richard openly attacking Captain Chase in the press, accusing him of dumping his overruns on the market as free giveaways, and supposedly depriving the working man of wages.
So he wasn't just criticizing his competitor, he was positioning himself as the pragmatic, responsible capitalist who could save a town from sentimental ruin.
Precisely. And this industrial crisis, the union agitation, and the general strike call in Port Ticonderoga, this is precisely when Richard arrives at Avilion. He makes his presence felt in the Chase family's private life.
It's a powerfully symbolic scene.
It really is. Richard arrives in those sleek, large cars with 5 other quite big men in dark overcoats. It's the appearance of organized, predatory power descending upon the failing old money establishment.
And the implication is strong.
Very strong. This was either a demonstration of force for strike-breaking or a forced predatory acquisition where Captain Chase was given no real choice but to sell or surrender control. This ruthless act of leveraging the Depression to take over a failing family business is the actual polluted foundation of the wealth and status that Richard later used to cage the Chase sisters.
This sets the stage perfectly. Richard's public image was built on prosperity and political promise, but his private reality, exposed by Iris's recollections, was built on concealed grief, ruthless financial manipulation, and the exploitation of a family that was already in decline and suffering from some serious generational trauma.
To understand the tragedy, you really have to understand the source of that decline.
Let's move to the family history then, focusing on Avilion, the house itself. It sounds less like a home and more like a carefully maintained, oppressive museum to a vanished ideal.
Avilion is absolutely central. It wasn't a cozy family residence. It was a monument to grandmother Adelia Chase's standards. Adelia married Benjamin Chase, the founder of Chase Industries, specifically for his money. Her job was to provide him with culture and set these exacting, unachievable standards for the family.
So when she died,
Benjamin insisted the house be preserved exactly as she left it. So Iris and Laura grew up inside this conception of who they ought to be.
that's suffocating.
Terribly. They were surrounded by preserved remnants of a life that Iris describes as ambitious, relentless, yet ultimately vanished. We're told of the railway hotel food, the 12-course dinners, and the library adorned with photos of Benjamin Chase posing proudly with 3 different prime ministers. It was concrete evidence of culture and money that was just crushing the next generation.
And as the family fortune started to wane,
Iris observes that the house began to feel dog-eared, apologetic, losing the courage of its own pretensions. It was a gilded cage losing its guilt.
the father, Captain Norval Chase, he's the key figure in this decline. Before the war, he was serious and honest, married a schoolteacher named Liliana, who was dedicated to helping the poor. An idealistic pairing.
A pairing that was shattered almost immediately by the Great War. It destroyed him. He returned a shattered wreck, physically scarred, with a missing eye and a bad leg.
But the psychological wounds were even deeper.
Oh, much deeper. He suffered from chronic nightmares, debilitating fits of rage, and drank heavily just to manage the symptoms. There's a newspaper photo of him that captured it perfectly, wearing a black patch over his right eye, his left eye glaring balefully. Iris describes the scarring as a web of scarred flesh, his missing eye the spider.
So this trauma created an atmosphere of constant tension and anxiety in the household, didn't it?
Yes, his wife, Liliana, tried desperately to create an atmosphere of calm. She would indulge and coddle him, but his trauma and his rage were always palpable. But maybe his deepest pain was philosophical, his atheism. He could never reconcile his profound lack of faith with his devout wife's powerful, constant forgiveness.
He felt their shared life was poisoned by a fatal potion, keeping them forever apart. What did he do to cope with that?
He sought isolation in the one forbidden place for the girls, the stumpy turret of Avilion. He would climb up there to smoke and drink himself into numbness, sometimes slamming against the walls in a fit of despair. Iris interprets this as his attempt to protect his wife from the worst of his internal chaos, acting as a gentleman, even in his fits of drunken rage.
And this trauma, this inability to reconcile his identity, directly influenced his fatal devotion to the button factory workers, setting the stage for Richard Griffin's takeover.
Absolutely. His loyalty was rooted in his war experience and the loss of his brothers. He literally changed the letterhead to Chase and Sons, even though only he remained. He felt this paternal obligation to his employees.
A captain who should never desert his ship.
Exactly. Even when all logic suggested he should shut down operations during the Depression. This idealistic refusal to lay off men, rooted in trauma and a sense of duty, is what opened the door for Richard, the cold pragmatist, to swoop in and take control.
And the atmosphere of a villain, defined by inherited status and paternal trauma, was compounded by the early death of their mother, Liliana.
Liliana died of a fever and weakness 5 days after collapsing when a teacup shattered in the kitchen. It's this small, precise image that encapsulates a larger, sudden loss. Iris was only 4, Laura was even younger.
That's so young.
And Iris remembers this chilling scene. Laura hiding on the kitchen table, and Iris herself wiping up a trail of dark red spots on the white tile spots that look like blood. This early trauma just defined their development.
And the sisters developed, well, diametrically opposed strategies for surviving this traumatic, distant environment. Iris became the accommodating child.
Iris learned the art of silence and helpfulness to stay near her mother and later to navigate society. She explicitly states that she cared what people thought and that she consciously lacked the courage of her convictions. She became the ultimate pragmatist.
The one who navigated the world by appearances and social expectations.
She was, in essence, Richard's perfect prey.
Laura, on the other hand, sounds utterly uncompromising, immediately labeled as someone not the same as other people.
Laura was startling to outsiders because she exposed the skewed element that most people keep hidden, the uncomfortable truth. She had this tranquil single-mindedness in her belief system, whether that was her intense childhood belief in God or her later political ideals.
She famously declared that for her, no place in home.
Meaning home does not exist in the conventional sense. It reflects her early feeling of displacement in a villain. She was the idealist who terrified others because she refused to conform to required social or emotional norms.
We see this difference and the toxic nature of the household come into sharp focus during the Tudor incident involving a Mr. Erskine.
Mr. Erskine. He replaced the delicate Miss Violence. He was described as a stocky, tweed-covered man with a nasty temper and a distinct, unpleasant smell like the bottom of a damp laundry hamper.
Charming.
His methods were pure tyranny, hair-pulling, ear-twisting, ruler-whacking, and locking the girls into a bare room after concluding they had the brains of insects or marmots.
But the abuse went far beyond physical discipline. Laura revealed a darker truth.
Yes, she told Iris, with characteristic calm, that Mr. Erskine was attempting to grope her, specifically under my skirt, panties.
And how did Iris react?
Iris, the pragmatist conditioned by denial, found the revelation implausible at first. But Renee, the nursemaid and housekeeper who was functionally their true mother figure, did not doubt Laura for a second.
Renee's reaction is fascinating because it's a brilliant example of the pragmatist using the tools of the world against the immoral.
Renee knew confronting the tutor directly as a housekeeper would only result in her being dismissed or called a liar.
So she couldn't just go to their father.
No. So instead, she performed an act of brilliant pragmatic justice. She went to the button factory, got him dismissed by planting scandalous, highly suggestive photographs, women in black stockings, and contorted, splay-legged positions, which she claimed to have innocently found under his bed.
So, Renee protected the uncompromising idealist, Laura, by leveraging a social scandal of appearances against a genuine moral threat. She used filth to achieve justice.
And that, I would argue, is the perfect foreshadowing for the rest of the story. The only way to combat the moral rot of Richard's society, the rot that allows men like Erskine and Griffin to operate with impunity, is not through direct, truthful accusation, but by cloaking the truth in something shocking, socially unacceptable, and ultimately something fictional.
Which brings us directly to the manuscript. This is where the deep dive truly begins. The nested novel, The Blind Assassin, which Iris eventually publishes, is the core truth of the source material. It's not mere escapist fiction.
Not at all. It's a richly detailed code that masks and memorializes the forbidden, doomed relationship between Laura and Alex Thomas, while simultaneously condemning the society that necessitated their secrecy.
This is a perfect example of critical thinking in action. The reader, like Iris, is forced to perform a literary excavation, figuring out how the fantastic, pulpy elements map onto the crushing reality of the Chase family. Let's start with the setting of their conversations. We've established Richard's world as one of gilded Toronto high society and formal Avillion dinners. Alex and Laura exist in the shadows of this world.
Exactly. Their meetings are illicit, furtive, and profoundly anti-establishment. They take place over quickly made, corn crust sandwiches and cheap lemonade, Or later, warm, cheap rye and water. They meet in these marginal, dingy places.
Like the Top Hat Grill.
Or a loner flat near Allen Gardens. Spaces that have no social currency and are far removed from Iris's proper, controlled life.
Alex, the storyteller, chooses the genre science fiction set on the planet Zychron, a dimension of space where anything you like can happen. Why that genre?
Science fiction, and pulp fantasy specifically, provides the perfect cover. It allows them to discuss political revolution, social hypocrisy, sexual exploitation, and betrayal, all while pretending to be talking about lizard men and assassins. It's a mechanism of escape, but also a mechanism of confession.
And the stories are told on the installment plan.
Which Alex cleverly uses to necessitate future illicit meetings. The continuing narrative guarantees the continuing relationship.
Iris later confirms Alex's identity as the writer when she desperately hunts down the pulp magazine.
She finds Lizard Men of Xenor, first thrilling episode in the annals of the Zychronian Wars. But the crucial, painful detail she notes is that Alex only wrote one episode before he disappeared. The vast majority of the nested novel we read, the rest of the story of the unnamed woman and the assassin, is Laura's continuation.
So it's Laura processing the betrayal,
Codifying their shared trauma and writing her own destiny after he's gone. It makes the manuscript an act of agency, not just memory.
The pulp narrative uses its outlandish sci-fi details to critique the brutal reality of their world. Let's start with the city of Sakil Norn.
Sakil Norn is clearly a dark, symbolic stand-in for industrial society itself, and specifically the origins of the Chase family's wealth. Its immense riches are based on child slaves weaving expensive carpets hidden away in dank, unseemly conditions.
It's a direct confrontation of hypocrisy.
It is. The narrative says the conquerors claimed the destruction of the city was due to its unholy practices, yet the pile of stones left after the destruction is a paradox of deliberate remembrance and an act of deliberate forgetting.
It seems to represent the need to erase the dark origins of wealth while preserving the resulting prosperity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was cleansed by blood because of these unholy practices, mirroring the moral rot underlying the wealth Richard now controls. Alex's political focus emphasized this. He talks about how the wealth requires proper sacrifices to carnivorous gods that valued human blood.
And the myth of Sakil Norn says 9 devout fathers offered their own children to be buried as holy guardians under the city's 9 gates.
That's a direct, chilling parallel, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sacrifice of young life, the future of the Chase family, specifically Laura, was required to sustain the political and industrial machine that Richard was building. It connects ancestral and modern cruelty.
Richard isn't building carpet factories with child slaves.
No, but he is certainly leveraging the collapse of a family business and leveraging the vulnerable position of a pregnant, politically involved woman to safeguard his own political ascendancy. The destruction of Sakil Norn becomes a warning. Look at the source of your comfort.
This theme of required sacrifice culminates in the core narrative, the blind assassin plot itself.
The blind assassin X has a very specific, ritualistic mission. He must kill the sentinel and then the maiden, and crucially, he must impersonate the maiden to get close enough to kill the king. It is a plan of carefully orchestrated deception and ultimate political overthrow.
And this dark fable functions as a prophecy for Laura's own ultimate sacrifice. How does this map onto the Chase Griffin situation?
Alex, the political agitator, must escape capture to continue his work. Laura, the unnamed woman, the one who gets pregnant, makes herself the decoy. She takes on the taint and the destruction, the social ruin, the institutionalization to protect Alex, the true revolutionary.
The king's courtier desires the maiden's heart still beating,
Suggesting the consumption of youth and life is central to the ceremony of power. Richard, the king of the Griffin Empire, consumes the Chase legacy and the lives of the women around him. Laura sacrifices herself, the maiden, to save the blind assassin.
And the political motive of the fictional plotters is equally ruthless, mirroring Richard's actions.
Yes, the pulp fiction is explicit. The plotters will seize the noble's wealth, kill the male offspring, and marry the daughters off to the victors to legitimize the seizure. The pampered wives will be tossed to the mob.
So while Richard achieves this through capitalist means marrying Iris, seizing the factory, the underlying ruthlessness is identical.
The blind assassin is the blueprint for Richard's corporate and marital takeover of the Chase family.
Moving on to another key satirical element, the critique of commodified womanhood during that era is perhaps most explicit in the description of the peach women of Abbey. This is a truly shocking piece of writing embedded in the manuscript.
It is a profound, grotesque, satirical commentary on male sexual fantasy and expectation. The peach women are beautiful, completely pliable, and entirely synthetic. They can be shameless or prudish on order.
And they don't experience pleasure or pain.
No, they are designed purely for the hero's gratification, and the consequence of hitting them is chilling.
When they are hit, no blood came out, only juice.
And when hit harder, they dissolve completely into sweet, mushy pulp, only to regenerate and return to their compliant state. This is the ultimate metaphor for the desired female partner of the era. Sexually available, emotionally detached, endlessly compliant, and lacking any genuine, messy human consequence. They literally dissolve if reality gets too brutal.
The male protagonists, Boyd and Will, they react with irritation to this synthetic perfection. They find it tedious and long for conflict.
They do. They quickly become dissatisfied, wishing for a rip-roaring dogfight with those scaly sons of guns from Xenor instead. They prefer a great big grilled steak, rare, dripping with blood. This frustration reveals the inherent dissatisfaction of the era's expectations for women.
Men desire real passion and visceral consequence, but society only sanctions the synthetic, compliant version.
And Richard's world demands a peach woman, and Laura, tragically, refuses to be one.
Finally, let's look at the enemies themselves. The lizard men of Xenor, who are an obvious representation of military and industrial might. They have a surprising vulnerability.
The lizard men are the embodiment of brute industrial force with their metal pants. But the fiction identifies their weakness. Those metal pants are inflammable at high temperatures.
Which is a crucial coded message.
It is. It's about the perceived weakness of military or industrial power like Richard's factories, when faced with an unexpected targeted countermeasure, like the long-range phosphorus bullet guns used by Earth snipers. It suggests that even the most heavily armored, powerful entities have a fatal, almost ludicrous vulnerability if the attack is targeted correctly.
And for Richard, that vulnerability is scandal and public opinion. So this entire Pulp Fiction narrative is not merely an entertaining subplot. It is Laura's deeply coded confession, her political manifesto, and her final will and testament, hidden in plain sight.
Absolutely. The sensational fantasy is the only way to speak the unspeakable truth in a society that values appearance above all else.
Okay, so after performing this meticulous decoding, we now arrive at the crucial final secrets that Iris uncovers. This is where we bridge the gap between the outlandish pulp fiction and the brutal reality of the Chase family tragedy.
Right. We must establish the timeline of the doomed romance. Alex Thomas, the forbidden lover, was indeed a political agitator, likely associated with communist or socialist movements, which explains the constant need for secrecy and code. Laura confirms to Iris that Alex left to join the fighting, specifically after the Spanish Civil War, saying he went off to the war.
And the breakup was handled with a devastating pragmatism by Alex, reflecting the high stakes of their world.
It was brutal. He ended things in a public setting, the Top Hat Grill, deliberately to ensure Laura wouldn't make a scene, weeping and wailing, which would have drawn dangerous attention to him. He was running for his life and needed her to understand the finality of it.
He was cynical about the relationship.
Terribly. Telling her she shouldn't worship him and that there's life after our life, acknowledging the profound risk he carried. He was running not just from Richard, but from a broader political climate hunting agitators.
And here is where the ultimate tragic betrayal unfolds. Soon after Alex leaves, Laura is pregnant. This is the truth behind Richard and Winifred's actions in 1935, when Laura briefly disappeared.
The initial 1935 disappearance was the first scare, when Richard rushed her away to Muskoka, claiming she was lodged safely with family friends. But the real disaster happened in 1937, when she was confirmed pregnant. This is when she was institutionalized at Bella Vista, a private sanitarium for nervous disorders.
And Iris finds the letter from Bella Vista.
She does. It describes Laura's condition, suffering from delusions, being a danger to herself, requiring constant sedation.
The shock for Iris is realizing this was not about madness. It was a pure, calculated cover-up.
Exactly. It was to hide the disgrace, the scandal of the illegitimate pregnancy, a scandal that would have ruined Richard's political career before it even started. Richard and Winifred were willing to label her insane, sedate her, and lock her away to protect their social and political capital.
Laura was the ultimate sacrifice to the altar of their ambition.
But Laura later frames this not as victimization, but as a necessary act of sacrifice, tying directly back to the blind assassin plot.
Right, she tells Iris she had to make the sacrifice.
The pain, the pregnancy, the institutionalization, all to save Alex. She believed that Callie Fitzsimmons, who had been Richard's guest, had told Richard where Alex was, and that Richard's people, his dark-coated industrial enforcers, would have tracked down and shot him.
So Laura, the uncompromising idealist, believes she kept her end of the bargain with God through this suffering.
She played the role of the sacrifice maiden perfectly to protect the revolutionary.
The ultimate irony is that her institutionalization ends, not by Richard's mercy, but by her own quiet financial agency.
That's right. Laura secures her release from Bella Vista by having a lawyer or trustee challenge her commitment. She uses her personal trust fund money she inherited from Captain Chase's estate, the very money Richard had tried to control. It's a subtle yet crucial victory.
The money from the morally compromised button factory finally grants her the freedom to leave the sanitarium, albeit years too late. The discovery of the manuscript, which details all of this, the forbidden romance, the pregnancy, the political context, forces Iris, the passive survivor, into her first real act of agency. She realizes the extent of Richard's calculated treachery, from concealing her father's death to institutionalizing Laura.
So Iris weaponizes the manuscript. Her confrontation with Richard is a masterclass in strategic maneuvering. She doesn't accuse Richard of the truth, of institutionalizing his sister-in-law to save his career.
What does she do?
Instead, she accuses him of using Laura's manuscript to attack him.
And she suggests Richard was never Laura's true lover.
Yes, she launches this brilliant strategic lie. She implies the manuscript details Richard's own squalid little fling with a girl who was simultaneously sleeping with another man, one she loved, unlike you. This completely turns the manuscript into a public threat against Richard's sexual and political credibility.
And Richard, frantic, claims she has sabotaged him.
But Iris has seized control of the narrative.
She immediately leverages this control to ensure her freedom.
She leaves Richard, taking their daughter Amy, and demands financial support for a small house in Port Ticonderoga in exchange for silence. She lies again, claiming the notebooks containing the ample proof of his behavior were locked away safely in a safe deposit box.
And Richard, fearing the scandal, gives in.
He sends Winifred to negotiate, but ultimately, yes, he concedes. Iris gains her small house, her independence, and her silence is bought, but at a huge emotional cost.
And the shadow of Laura's manuscript continues to cause tragedy long after Richard's death, particularly for Iris's own daughter, Amy.
This is the most heartbreaking consequence of the whole structure. Amy grew up deeply damaged, becoming an alcoholic who restlessly moved around. The tragedy is that Amy read Laura's book and believed the fiction over the messy, painful reality.
She believed Richard and Iris were not her real parents.
She preferred the fantasy that her mother was some mythical being, not the shop-soiled real kind that Iris actually was.
So the very mechanism Laura used to preserve the truth fiction ended up alienating Iris's own daughter.
Precisely. Amy refused to let Iris near her or her own daughter, Sabrina, believing Iris was part of the family cover-up and pollution. Iris, who sought safety through silence, inadvertently pushed her daughter into believing the sensational narrative that offered a better, albeit fabricated, escape.
Iris, now very old, facing her own imminent death around 1999, looks back on a life spent in sort of emotional anesthesia, having avoided thinking about her father's death and Richard's betrayal for decades. Her final act must be one of historical rectification.
Her final act is one of agency and profound courage. She decides the manuscript trunk should go to Sabrina, the granddaughter she's barely seen but has quietly shadowed. She views herself as Laura's other hand, the person who finalized the writing and published the book.
The living mausoleum.
The one who carried the weight of the secret, preserving the coded truth that Laura had created.
The final, devastating detail is the newspaper clipping from the Port Ticonderoga Herald and Banner in 1999 describing the death of Mrs. Richard Griffin.
And it lists her relationships: sister of Laura Chase, daughter of Captain Chase, wife of Richard Griffin, all connections to dead men and a dead sister, defining her entirely by the past tragedies she chose to memorialize. Iris may have spent her life trying to be invisible, but her final, most meaningful identity is intrinsically linked to the spectacular exposure of the truth in her sister's manuscript.
So if we synthesize all these layers, the newspaper reports, the private memories, and the cosmic pulp fiction, the accidental death of Laura Chase was the culmination of Richard's systematic exploitation of the Chase family wealth and Laura's self-sacrificing idealism, all codified and hidden within the pages of a sensational escapist novel.
The sources show us that the public facade, the accidental death on St. Clair Avenue, was simply Richard and Winifred's final, perfect cover-up.
Yeah.
It was the last act of control over a family they had leveraged for power. Laura died not accidentally, but as the inevitable consequence of a life built on suppressed trauma and forced sacrifice, fulfilling the promise she had made to protect Alex.
And the manuscript, The Blind Assassin, serves as a powerful testament, not just to a forbidden romance, but to a structural critique of society. It shows how the weak, the child slaves of Sahyul Norn, the pliable peach women, and women like Laura who lack money or position, are perpetually sacrificed to maintain the illusion of order and prosperity for men like Richard Griffin.
The pulp fiction ultimately becomes the only honest medium. Alex warned his lover that the professionals would find her out, that they would open her up like a package if they caught her. But by cloaking the brutal reality, pregnancy, political agitation, betrayal, institutionalization, in the outrageous fantasy of lizard men and blind assassins, Laura ensured the truth could survive and eventually reach those who needed it most, like her grandniece, Sabrina.
And Iris, the quiet sister who always cared what people thought, ultimately ensured the truth survived by publishing that manuscript. We are left to wonder, is the only way to expose the brutal reality of the world to cloak it in the sensational escapist fantasy of a blind assassin from another dimension of space? It certainly seems that the only way for the truth to be preserved in that stifling society was to become sensational fiction.
And that leads to a profound final thought for you, the listener. Iris, facing her own imminent death, is hoping Sabrina will discover the trunk and inform herself about her family origins. The novel is Sabrina's inheritance, a roadmap out of a contaminated history. The crucial realization is that Iris's entire life was spent trying to be safe and inconspicuous, prioritizing social acceptance. But she achieved her only real victory by becoming the other hand that helped sensationalize her sister's deepest pain. She found courage and authored her own redemption in the pages of what Richard had dismissed as nothing but filth. She chose truth over propriety at the very end.